Hello and welcome once again to Baked Beans Garage, where of course there's holes in it. Let's get into it. So this is my 1983 Volvo 245 that you last saw about 2 years ago. And truth be told, I did start filming this video way back then, but I'd figured I'd redo it with my modern production standards, i.e. no shaky cam. It also looks a bit different from last time because this time I actually took the time to jack it up, take the wheels off, and pressure wash everything I could see. And with that went most of the Hood Rat Supreme livery that was on here. But it did reveal a lot of this lovely Scotia blue. I think I'll keep that. But what isn't Scotia blue is this hood. Don't know what this color is called, but by the looks of it, colonial yellow. But we'll talk about that in due time. On to the point of this video, it's an old brick, so of course there are rust issues. The issues I have identified so far are this rocker panel, but not that one. Both rear floor pans, and both rear wheel arches where they meet the floor back there. But I have seen my videos before, so I know I'll find others. So for the purposes of this video, this is just a regular red block 245. We will talk about the various swaps and other goodies that will be happening in the next video. But anyways, to begin the series on this rig again, suppose we'll take the interior apart to get at that floor. And since this is the second time I'm taking this interior apart, most of the plastics and trim pieces are already gone. I just didn't have a better place to put the seats when I moved. Which is the same reason it now has an engine again. And back up here we could see we have the exceptionally rare topographical heat map carpeting option. Very nice. Also the disintegrating plastic center console, but that is standard equipment. Again, saving a lot of time by just having done it already. So don't use this as a guide, there's going to be more stuff connected to yours. Also don't use this as a guide, as it is one of my videos. And with all those problem areas uncovered and then some, looks like the worst of it is this here drinker's side aft floorboard. It looks like it's mostly contained to the sheet metal of the floor itself, but we'll need to give it a proper evaluation to know for sure. Well, as I expected, it is worse than expected. Suppose I'll get rid of this seatbelt reel and just start slashing. Well, nice of the rust to have taken care of those lower two bolts for me. And with a closer look at what ails this brick, I have already changed my mind. Here we could see it most likely started at that there plug, and has worked its way down into the pinch weld and into the rocker. And I had already mentioned the rocker panel. I do plan on replacing it, but I now realize that the issue very much involves the pinch weld between them. And while I do have the new patch panels for the floor, I do not yet have the rocker panel, so I think I will start on that side. And it looks like the spicy sadness on this side has stopped right about here for the most part. The inside of this rocker looks rather clean. So I just need to get some wires out of the way of the death wheel, and we'll start hacking. And now we have some more stuff out of the way. Now all that's left that I don't want to cut into are the brake lines, which are about there. So I think I'll pick it up to get those out of the way. And I'm not going to need any of these, but I guess I won't cut through any fuel lines either. And the fuel pump and filter will also be going away. So just so I'm not welding right next to that filter. Then finally we can start thinking about some new metal. Of course it's a 240, so new stampings are pretty easy to come by. So I think on both sides I'm going to cut into this seat support and make my seam underneath there and then just Zeus it back together. So now it's time for some cutting and for putting the panel in and out 100 million times to get it to fit right. I have arrived at a situation I'm happy with. This fits nice and tight so I can get a real nice butt weld all around the outside. But on this edge I have left a flange so I can do a lap weld. There is already a double wall right here, so not much point in trying to get a butt weld. So I just need to poke some holes and clean up some edges. Then I can start with the hot metal glue gun. This might actually be the first time these little clamps help instead of just aggravating me. And of course it will take some poking and prodding as I go to get it lined up perfectly. But I think that is pretty good. That might be a bit imperfect, but if you can walk it, you can weld it. Well, as per usual, some of those are prettier than others, but it is in there. Now I just need to burn in this little filler piece to finish the seat structure. Of course we would have had a flange and some spot welds here, but that's just some mass production nonsense. In most cases, either a fillet weld or a butt weld is going to be stronger and more resistant to the corrosions. I'm sure I could come up with some other excuses if you want me to. with a little bit of grinding just to save my ego, I think this side's done. And my new rocker panel has arrived, so we can move back to the other side where the spicy sadness is a bit more advanced. Now, as you may know, this is a unibody automobile, which means that's structural, as is everything else, and I don't really want to bend my whole car by cutting that out. So I think the second thing I will do is weld in this random piece of angle iron as an extra tension member in the pinch weld while I cut the rocker out. Then once the rocker is booger blasted back in, I can cut out the floor and do that. Now the first thing I think I will do is pluck the engine back out. That's just sitting on its mounts for transport. That way there is the least weight as possible acting on the car, what not to bend it. All of this, however, is probably unnecessary. 240s aren't exactly known for their structural floppiness. Also gonna have to get rid of these doors. Those are gonna be in the way. So a little disassembly montage, then we'll start throwing sparks again. Huh. And with a better look at the situation, we already have a better idea of how it got like this. So I already knew this rig had been resprayed in the original color before the rattle can job. Here we see more evidence of that starting to peel. But up at the front corner of this rocker, there are some very not factory looking welds. On top of that, the entire pinch weld just looks ground smooth without any spot welds. But I also noticed that this contour right here is not at all straight, and there's definitely some filler up in the front here. So I'm guessing at least some of this rocker was replaced at some point and they just didn't paint the inside. Even on the outside, this is some very thin paint with no undercoating or anything. But those welds up at the front are all I see. I would like to know where the rest of the seam is. Further evidence of some sinful bodywork, whatever's going on here. Yep, there is a seam right there. And save for where there's no metal at all, it's super thin right here, so this is going to look horrible. And if necessary at all, that should keep the car straight. Hopefully I don't end up learning something. Suppose all that's left is to start peeling this rocker panel. And that panel goes all the way up underneath, so I suspect that's the original. And the seam is actually up here. Suppose we'll find it. And I can't complain too much because I had planned on doing pretty much the same thing. Now to get the rest of the rocker off of the pinch weld, and then we'll see where we want to make the rest of the seams. And I was hoping to not, but this inner rocker is pretty rough towards the front, so I'll have to address that before I go any further. And with that looking pretty serviceable, I can touch up a few spots on the pinch weld and then cut out the section where the floor is getting replaced. And with the inner rocker almost ready for an outer rocker, I'll have to address these holes in the rear wheel arch before I go any further. But those will almost certainly become one hole after some exploratory slashing. And that should be all the booger welds I need to get the shell ready to put the new rocker on, so let's finish prepping that. With any luck, this will be the last test fit. And as always, the only way to get perfect measurements is to not make any measurements. So I have made this cardboard template from the other side. And it looks like that's right where I need it. And there was a double wall section right here that I welded up just to be safe. But with that, it looks like it fits exactly like I need it to. Of course, I started this on the ground. We're now on the lift. I have not been able to detect anything moving. This piece fits exactly the same in both configurations. So assuming it was straight to begin with after that previous bodywork, I think it's fine. So about halfway through that montage, I remembered those two little ribs that were inside the rocker. Oh well, I'm just going to pretend I know they weren't important. But we'll clean up those welds later. I want to move straight along to the floor. We can finally cut out this temporary brace. I have found this spinny stick and its crossmember to be in my way. And now to begin the lengthy tedium of getting this fitted up, I just need to trim it to slide it under that seat support so I can lay it down flat and scribe the outline from the underside. Except I explained it this time. Of course, I had to weld some captive nuts into the inner rocker so the seatbelt has a place to live. But with that, the entire rear floor is done. So now to finish out the floor, we can move up here to the drinker's side footwell where there is this rather large patch of the spicy sadness. This, of course, being right where these two pieces of floor meet. There used to be some spot welds right here, but that overlap, as you can see, likes to trap moisture and turns into this. That is, again, why I would rather use a butt weld or a fillet weld rather than a spot weld like that. But no sense in complaining too much more. I already know it's going to be a much bigger headache than it looks like. Yep, there's holes. There's also this outrigger here with the jack point on it. I think I'll start cutting from down here because I feel like it. Well, as expected, this turned into a much bigger headache than expected. Of course, we had this hole, but up here there was a bunch of real deep pitting and a few little holes. Of course, the correct thing to do would be to put a patch right there, but I just welded them in because I kind of like doing that, even though it's stupid and pointless and a bit wasteful. No matter, just don't look at it too long. There is now metal there. Over here, this outrigger is kind of in the way, and I had to cut in to the inner rocker even more. It would have been nice to do that while the outer rocker was off, but oh well. After much tedium, I have this piece to put in there. There will be a few less than ideal seams right down in here, but at least around the outside there will be a nice tight butt weld. I'll just have to take some extra care to seal this up real nice. Well, at no point did that become any easier, so it's a bit ugly, but serviceable. My best guess is that's all a result of a leaky windshield, but hopefully that's not a problem going forward. That won't be for quite a few videos yet. So to finish up the floor, we'll address the same spot on the other side. And at least over here, this seam where we had the holes on the other side is still solid, but up in here along this pinch weld, we have some rather advanced spicy sadness, as well as the front of the inner rocker. There's quite a large hole and evidence of some critters living in there. Anyway, you know the drill. So it just looks a bit gross right here, but that is still metal. Up here, that will obviously need a patch. But it does look like the inner rocker has suffered the most here. I'm not looking forward to that, but I now realize that fender is still on and it's kind of in the way now. Well, I guess both front footwells are going to be pretty ugly. I just can't see what I'm doing down in there. But oh well, it's all made of metal again. Now after that, of course, there's going to be some surface rust and pitting left. Up here I have already addressed it. There was a product called Naval Jelly from Loctite that I used to use, a rust dissolver that worked pretty well on stuff like this, but they discontinued it without even asking me. So instead I have found this green stuff that seems to work well enough. And that'll chew on it and make bubbles and eventually look like that, which is supposedly paintable. Speaking of paint, all that's left to do before making this one color is to get rid of the rest of the sound deadening. I don't really want to do that right now. I'd rather get the rest of the car made of metal, so let's go to the back and address the spare wheel wells. So off to the sides of the hatch, all 240s have these protuberances that hang down past the edge of the quarter panel. That's to make room for the spare tire right here, and it's mirrored on the other side for some reason. And around the outside we would have had some lap joints and some spot welds. Most of those are now just holes. And for reasons we'll talk about when you're older, I want to get rid of that protuberance altogether and just make that a flat panel. So to begin, I'll get the bumper out of the way and then I'll just start cutting and see where I end up. And it looks like one big rectangle is going to take care of this for the most part, but there's also this, which of course means welding on the outside of the body. If you've been here a while, you know I'm pretty bad at that. There's also a double wall right along here from the lap joint. The only reason I could think of to get rid of it is because I feel like it, but I don't feel like it. Well, that's the first time I've really put an effort into keeping something flat while I welded it. It took a long time, but at least it still didn't work. I'm just gonna have to skim that with a bit of filler. My skills aren't quite there yet. Anyway, on to the rectangle. And to produce a template, we'll just use the tried and true smash a piece of cardboard into it. Probably good enough. Now to make it out of metal, but I'm about out of GTI roof. And I'm sure I've complained about this in the past, but you just can't seem to get good metal anywhere. Well, I'm sure you could if you bought a whole coil, but that's a little out of the budget. And the stuff you get at the hardware store just falls apart if you get it wet. So I just take it from a donor vehicle when I can. There's usually one around. And this fits remarkably well for the first try. I'm just going to start welding before I think about it too much. And there's some details left that I'll address later, but that's all the big stuff boxed in on this side. At least there's only one more side to do. And over here we still have this skid thingy. I had already taken it off on the other side. I'm not entirely certain what this is for, but knowing how Volvo builds cars, I'm gonna guess that it's a skid to push the car up and away from something if you were to get hit by a car lower than you. Very Volvo, very Swedish. If you're certain, let me know in the comments. And the rust looks pretty much the same on this side, so now to do all that again, just mirrored. Well, that side wasn't quite so lucky, so I did get rid of the seam where the pinch weld was. At least I probably learned something by now to keep it flat. Anyways, after a cleanup with a wire wheel on the inside, it still looks pretty awful. Now, to address the problem you may have already seen coming, the reason you don't see completely flat spots of floor in a car, they always have ribs or beads or something of the sort. What we have made here is basically a big bistable spring, so it's going to do this. That's called oil canning. If you don't know why that's called oil canning, here is an oil can. It does that. Now, the right way to address that is to roll some beads in there to give it some structure, but I don't have a bead roller. So instead, I'm just going to weld in some ribs. But first, I'm going to give it a bunch of thwomps to maybe stretch it out and find the shape it really wants to be. It does appear that actually did what I wanted it to do. Cool. So now those are nice and stiff, albeit a bit ugly on account of the angle and I can't see. But to remedy that, I just won't get too close with the camera. And with the butt cheeks deleted, that is all of the rust gone. Now to keep it gone, we'll need some paint and some seam sealer, but we still have all that factory sound deadening in the way. So I will now gloss over many hours of torching and scraping and scrubbing and wire wheeling and cleaning to get rid of it. And finally, we arrive at a nice, ready-to-paint floor. And for my floors, I always use the Special Elixir, a real heavy oil-based paint plus the catalyst hardener. This is basically tractor and implement paint. So I will now do some vibes-based mixing and get to slathering. And I like to do a coat of paint before the sealant, that way the paint can work its way down into whatever open pinch welds might be present. And for such areas, I'll just give it a very unceremonious slather. Since it has the catalyst hardener in there, it's going to cure whether it likes it or not. even if it's in a puddle. And after letting that cure for probably long enough, we're ready for some sealant. But of course the bottom of the car is still covered in road tar. I'll never comprehend why people insist on doing this. Luckily this is not a Rust Belt rig, or else it would have entirely returned to the earth by now. But at least that only takes about a full day of torching and scraping and burning myself and aggravating my carpal tunnel. Anyways, I'm finally here with some urethane sealant. I don't know how similar this stuff is to windshield urethane, but if I had to guess, I'd say the difference is entirely in the label. And I'm fairly convinced by that stuff. It sets up real nice and hard, just like windshield urethane. And finally, before a final coat of paint, we just have the holes that are supposed to be there. But for the first time in my life, I can just put back the ones I took out. Usually the rust starts here and then works its way into the floor, but even the original galvanization is still there. Very nice. It did not take me long to get completely spoiled rotten by the lift. I also now realize I hadn't taken off the road tar back here yet, but I guess that's a problem for later now. You'll also notice I sealed up some of the seams Volvo didn't bother to for some reason, just a little extra rust protection. But with that, the entire middle section of the floor is done. And for the last line of defense against rust is the cavity wax. It does what it says, it's wax for the cavities. Both of these products are basically lanolin oil with some additives. They do the same thing as boiling linseed oil and pouring it into your tubes after you're welding them. So I'll spray that around the inside of all the frame rails and rockers and seat supports, just stuff I can't quite get paint into, but not quite yet. There might be some more cutting and welding I need to do for the suspension and transmission swap, so we'll get to that. Speaking of other modifications, you'll notice that I left the rear corner of this rocker open and unfinished. We'll get to that next time. Anyways, this has been a tremendously productive episode. We got the entire floor fixed up, a rocker replaced, and now the entire shell is ready to start sprinkling some money and some parts into. Don't look at those yet. But that is it for today. If you're still here, I appreciate you watching. I do hope you found it informative, entertaining, something of the sort. I do ask that you do some engagement down below, maybe click subscribe and bell. If you really like my face and my voice, you can head over to Patreon to help support me. There you'll see some random, sporadic behind-the-beans content. Thank you to my current Patreon supporters. A special thanks today to Brandon, one of my Patreon supporters. He sent me a bunch of really cool photography gear that I'll probably learn to use at some point. He runs a photography service here in the US. He does things like film development, printing, and scanning. So if you do film photography or need some prints or scans done, maybe check him out. Anyways, thank you again for watching. This has been Baked Beans Garage, and I am Chinchilla. I will see you next time.
Yeah.